the goal of form and exactly what you're doing here. And I apologize, I'm gonna have to read this, but a big part of it is to empower you to develop and expand your skills as leaders within the Canadian sports system. A lot of what you do here, you're supposed to bring back home and affect positive change at your NSO, make it better and make the whole system better. You're also, the goal of form is also to inspire athletes to find their voice and contribute to meaningful change where they live, work, and play. So that's what I just alluded to before. And also build greater awareness among athletes of the roles and programs that Athletes Can and our partners offer, such as CIBC Team Next. And Natalia is here from CIBC Team Next. Hi, thank you. It is an excellent program that's pretty unique in the sports system, and it really does target the next team, and it's been really fun for us to work with and be a part of. So thanks again, Natalia. Overall, I think you all have a pretty good idea of what Athletes Can does, but leadership is one of the critical things we think we do and we strive to do. And we provide leadership by standing on a stage as opposed to the ground. We provide leadership through programs like Sports Solution, which supports you directly, but then we also try to affect positive change in the entire sports system. And Jazz works tirelessly, along with Ashley and the rest of the crew and the board, to try to make the sports system more fair for everyone. And Jazz is going to touch upon a little bit, some more of those points coming up, but athlete representation continues to strengthen across sport organizations with athlete councils and athlete board members. There are athlete board members at the COC, the CPC, Commonwealth Games Canada, Toronto 15, Pan Am, Para-Pan Am Games, Canadian Sport Institutes, NSOs, CCES, and so on and so forth. And I think, as Lori had mentioned earlier, that just didn't exist not that long ago. So the sports system has been, we've had a huge impact on the sports system, and we need to continue playing that role and having that impact. We also bring together the voices of athletes across the country and across various organizations, and that gives us the unique position to go to someone like the minister or an organization who wants to change policy with a voice that really does represent all athletes in all sports. It's not perfect, but we do a pretty good job of it, and we're the only group that does that job. And we work really hard at it, and we will continue to work really hard at it. And we also encourage athletes to be more engaged. And I think, personally, this is one of our most critical functions. You will come out of this weekend with skills you did not have, even if it's your 5th, 6th, or 22nd time here. I have no doubt you'll learn something by being here. Even if it's just talking with people in the hospitality suite or elsewhere, you will come out with knowledge about how to be a better leader and more effective in your NSO, and really in the rest of your life. I mean, the board skills, if you want to go into business, it's governance. Everything here applies to your entire life, and it's just very important, and so I'd just like to thank you all once again for coming here and being a part of this, and you're going to have an awesome time. And I'd like to invite Jazz up to talk a little bit more in detail about some of the awesome things that we've been working on and finishing up and continue to do and all that stuff.
Are we good? Sure. No. Just getting cues from the back. I see. We're trying to get the sound turned off at the back, so I don't have to compete with the displays. Oh, when I'm back. All right, so as Tom was saying, we're going to spend a lot of time this weekend talking about how we can all come together as a group, as a community, and also as individuals to play a role in affecting positive change, being a responsible voice within the system. But Athletes Can also plays a role on your behalf within the system. So certainly we're here to support you, to provide you with tools, resources, development to enable you to be effective change makers within your own environments. But certainly we play that role within the sports system, representing your voice at many tables. And so we've been quite active over the past year. You know, there's kind of a lot going on in sports. So this is where I get to share with you some of the areas where Athletes Can is actively engaged in trying to make a difference. And certainly when, you know, we're talking over the weekend and we touch on these in more detail, you'll have greater context. And certainly going forward, if it's something that you're passionate about, we certainly want to hear from you. We want to get you engaged. We want you to be involved. So this gives you a bit of context as to what keeps us busy, keeps us up late at night. So over the past year, there's been a lot of work within the sport community, because you may have heard that we have a new world anti-doping code in effect that will be effective January 1st, 2015. And so Canada has the role of updating our Canadian anti-doping program to comply with the code effective January 1st, 2015. So the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport, the CCES, they reached out to the sport community earlier in the spring, and they had their first draft ready. And so Athletes Can went to a symposium in company of practically every national sport organization to learn about what was happening. And so they provided a draft, and we spent a lot of time going through this draft, and we provided our feedback. And our major points of concern in terms of the session itself was that, or the draft itself, was that in it, currently they're proposing, I'm getting instructions from the back that my face is, I'll get rid of the cap. There we go. There. How's my hat? Okay, so in that, the draft has two items that caused us concern. Well, actually three, but they rescinded one, so we're down to two. Well, the first was an athlete contract that they want to propose going forward. And so it would either be a standalone contract between athletes and the CCS, or clauses that they insert within your existing athlete agreements. And the first 3 points of the clauses that they wish to include are relatively simple. It's, I agree, I am a part of the CADP. I agree that I've gone through some sort of education. I agree that you can share my information with the associated doping agencies that are involved with the doping control processes. The fourth point that causes us concern, and that we're continuing to work with the CCS on, is a proposal that we allow the CCS to share our personal contact details with law enforcement and border agencies so that they can pursue investigations. Our concern is that this is an incredible infringement on athlete rights in terms of being able to share your personal contact details, your personal information with such outside bodies. And so we provided that feedback in the first round of the draft. They've recently come out with a second draft, and we've provided that exact feedback back, that we are steadfastly opposed to that level of infringement. As Canadians, no other individual within Canadian society would have to have that. Why do we have to take such significant steps with our athletes? While understanding that we want clean sport, we demand an environment where our athletes can compete in a clean, drug-free environment. But there's certain provisions that we need to safeguard when it comes to our athletes' rights and freedoms. The other aspect of the draft that we're currently providing feedback on is the issue of funding. And so everyone in this room is aware of the issues of sport and funding and how we're all working within very tight budgets, right? We have tremendous support by the Government of Canada and sponsors across the country who are helping to fuel sport in Canada, but often it's not enough. Often we're still working with deficits. And so CCS is finding themselves in a deficit position based on their current budgets. And so to continue to fund their programs going forward, they've looked to the sport community to fill their current deficit. On the surface, okay, kind of get it. We need a strong doping program in Canada. But where's that money going to come from? So if you think of each of your sports out there and what their financial situation is right now, a lot of them are probably running pretty close to the line. I would say probably a lot of them don't even have reserve funds in place. Maybe embrace a deficit budget on a regular basis. And so, you know, they're going to have to find that money. That money is going to have to come from somewhere because each sport in Canada is going to have to be able to comply with the Canadian anti-doping program. If you don't comply with the Canadian anti-doping program, you don't have a sport. So that money is going to come from either the reduction of services or from increased fees. And so our feedback to CCS is that our concern is that, well, all of us, again, want to ensure that we have the best possible doping program in place for Canada. That money is going to come from our athletes. It's either going to come from increased fees that you have to pay individually, or it's going to come from, you know, a training camp being cut, or less access to services that your sport already provides. And so we're, you know, reaching out aggressively to the CCS to reconsider this because of the grave implications that it has. So that's a big chunk of work that myself and Josh Vanderbies, our president-elect, and our board and everyone else we've talked to has been spending some time with over the past year. Another item is athlete agreements. So how many people in this room have an athlete agreement? How many people in this room have had issues with their athlete agreements at one time or another? How many people in this room have actually read through their athlete agreement word for word, line by line, page for page? That is good, but I don't see every hand in there. Our issue with athlete agreements is that they're the top issue of dispute within the sports system. And so, as we'll talk about a little bit later, we have a program called the Sports Solution that Athletes Can runs. And we spend tremendous amount of time each and every year assisting athletes either to understand their athlete agreements or to navigate disputes associated with their athlete agreements. And so because of all of the work that we've done over the years in, you know, providing athletes with assistance and support to navigate these issues, you know, it came to us that, you know what, we got to take a closer look at this. Why are we dealing with the same disputes time over time? Why are we dealing with the same clauses that end up leading to the same issues time over time over time? So we pulled together a working group, members of our board and other experts within the sport community, to come together to look at how the athlete agreements have evolved, because they're relatively, you know, in the context of sport, they're relatively new bodies within the administration of sport. They came about in the 1980s because of the advent of the Athlete Assistance Program. And then they were originally intended to provide a contract of sorts between, you know, the Government of Canada and athletes in terms of being able to fund for pursuit of excellence. But since that time, they've evolved a lot. And if you think about your athlete agreement that you have now, or that you had most recently, it's got a lot of stuff in it. It's got, you know, doping clauses, it's got team selection clauses, it's got social media clauses, it's got sponsorship clauses, you know, depending on your sport, it's got a myriad of different things in it. And sometimes they don't always work very well together. And some of it you have no control over. You know, there are clauses that are mandated to your NSO that they have to put in. And so we've taken a look at it and we've identified the main issues associated with athlete agreements, and then we've proposed some solutions. And so we're going to spend some time on that tomorrow. Marissa and Kendra from our Sports Solution, they've been directly involved in this working group over the last 9 months, and they're going to share the findings. And we're really keen to hear your feedback. Are there any other issues that, you know, we want to bring to light in the course of pulling this report together? You know, are there other solutions that we can consider? Because at the end, when we finalize this report, we're going to bring it back to Sport Canada. We're going to bring it back to our sport partners and see if there's a better way forward, a better way to navigate athlete agreements in Canada. So that's another item we've been working quite hard on. Another one, athlete council. So how many people in this room come from a sport that has an athlete council? Good. There's a good show of hands, actually. Athlete councils are in some sports and they're not in others, but athlete councils have an incredible ability to provide a responsible feedback mechanism within sport. And oftentimes we find that these athlete councils, in some cases they work very, very well, and they have the support needed either through the athletes or through the NSO to provide a meaningful and responsible feedback mechanism year after year after year. In some sports, it's like ebb and flows, depending on who's involved, depending on, you know, the support of the NSO at the time. And so we've come together and sat down as a board and looked at creating standards for athlete councils. Because sometimes we do have athlete councils come to us and I was like, what really is our responsibility? What should we be doing? And so, you know, we worked really hard to put some standards together so that, you know, for those athlete councils that are currently in place and for those sports who want to create an athlete council, there's a sound process and a sound basis upon which you can build or sustain an athlete council. Another area that we're really passionate about as an organization is inclusivity. So who here was at Forum last year? Right. So if you recall, last year we hosted a session on welcoming sport environments. And so we had a panel with 2 athletes and 2 sport experts. And so we had Christian Burley and Lindsay Alcock, who provided the perspectives of out athletes within the sport community. And then we had Bruce Kidd, professor, U of T, former retired national team athlete, academic expert, you know, and then Jennifer Birch-Jones, who's highly engaged within the sport system in broadening the conversation. How do we make sport inclusive? How do we make sport that's safe and welcoming for all? And so, you know, we started the conversation back at Forum, and we've brought it forward in a number of different ways. Athletes Canada's been really involved in helping Cause and Coaches of Canada develop a resource called Leading the Way. And you're going to see it on your tables tomorrow. And it's tools and resources to provide athletes and coaches with the mechanisms they need to ensure that sport is inclusive and welcoming to all as we can make it. And we've got the sports solution. Anyone here use the sports solution before? Yeah. So we're going to learn more about the sports solution over the course of the weekend, but the Sports Solution is a program offered by Athletes Can that provides athletes with assistance should they have any questions about the sports system whatsoever, or have a dispute, because we do know that at times there are disputes in sport. And so they provide full comprehensive support and assistance at any stage. You know, you could be calling up going, what does this clause mean within this team selection policy or athlete agreement? Or it could be, I haven't gotten selected for a team, or I have a harassment issue, or, you know, it doesn't matter what the issue is. There's a myriad of them. I didn't get carding, or, you know, I did get carding, but someone else is appealing the decision. We help you from stage 1 all the way through to the end. We handle on average about 50 cases a year. It impacts over 200 athletes, about 10% of the national team athlete population each year. We've dealt with every single sport in the sports system at one stage or another. It's an invaluable service that we offer, and certainly it's one that we want you to know about and we want you to tell everybody else about, because certainly, you know, once you get into a position where you really need information fast, you're under a tight deadline, you haven't made a team, or you're being, you know, you're under pressure to sign an agreement, you need to know that that service is out there. And so we've got Marissa and Kendra at the back. Wave, hi. They are your go-to people this weekend. Get to know them. Get to know the services that are available, because it is critical that you know that we have your back, that we are out there available to help you anytime there is an issue. So when we're looking big picture at the sports system, you know, Athletes Can's, you know, working up here on those collective big issues, but certainly within your sports, there's a lot of issues that you can be dealing with as well. And it's trying to bring those forward, right? And so how do we bring those forward? How do we get our boards involved? How do we get our membership to really recognize and embrace the athlete voice? And so coming out of last year's Athletes Can Forum, we had launched the initiative called the Athlete Report. And so this was a mechanism by which every single year, your sport provides an athlete report to your board and AGM. Yeah? So you find out when your AGM is, you reach out to your athlete population within your sport, you collect the major feedback that's happening within your sport so that you can feed that back into your NSO. at the board, at the AGM. So where the decision makers are at, they can listen to it, they can make changes, they can be aware of what's happening on the front lines of sport. So we've communicated with a lot of you over the past year and spreading the word about embracing the concept of an athlete report. And so we will be continuing to work on that over the next year. And we certainly want to support you in that, want to support you in providing a mechanism that can feed that athlete voice up to the decision-making levels. And certainly going hand in hand with that is the support and creation of athlete councils. So, you have a body in place that can facilitate that feedback mechanism. An athlete rep within a sport is certainly stronger when they have a team to work with. And so creating that athlete council around them. And so the standards that I mentioned earlier, we'll be sharing this weekend and going forward within our leadership module. Yeah, and then I think just one other item that we're going to be happy to share with you over the coming few weeks is we're really curious to find out what the landscape is of athlete leadership in Canada right now. So many of you would have received an email from us over the last, probably August, asking to complete an athlete leadership report. We also reached out to the National Sport Organization community to do the same thing. And so what we are doing is we're mapping athlete leadership in Canada. What does it look like? Where is it active? Where is it maybe not so active? And painting that picture so that we can better invest in you and in our sports to ensure that the right services are in place, the right type of support is in place. So when we come back, we'll be able to provide a really strong and cohesive level of services and support to the support system as a whole. So when we're talking about the support system and the different areas that we're involved in, oftentimes the conversation is based around what we need, what's not working, but there's so much out there that we have that we're able to impact and change, and it's often the little things, So it's good to celebrate those small wins. It's good to recognize that, oftentimes you're not having to change a huge policy within your sport to make huge impacts. It's those little wins, it's those little tweaks along the way that can have the most meaningful long-term impact on your sport. And so I have 3 athletes here today that are going to share their stories in terms of how they've been able to positively influence their sport with small wins that they've been able to achieve. So at this time, I'd like to invite Jeff Christie, Thea Culley, and Dasha Peregoudova up to share their experiences.
How's this happening? How's everyone doing? Good? Enjoying this so far? So my name is Jeff Christie. I was a luge athlete. I luged for 16 years and I retired March 2011. So I'm 3 years out. It's interesting for those of you who've gone through it. But let's go back about sport leadership. I luged for 16 years. I grew up just behind here, about 5 minutes away. So I was pretty lucky in that I had a world-class facility in my backyard that I was able to master a sport and kind of go from there, lead me to the Olympics. But sport leadership is something that wasn't really on my radar right at the beginning, but it really came on my radar as I started competing on the national team. And the reason that was is we go to Europe, and our sport, you probably leave about mid-October and go to Europe until about the end of February. We were gone. It was a very Eurocentric sport. A lot of decisions were made in a true old boys club. You saw them in the back corner at all the races, drinking beers, laughing, that type of thing. And speaking also of when it comes to athlete commissions and councils and such, Luge had none. We still don't, actually, on an international level. We had 2 athletes reps, one that sat on a sport-related side and one that sat on a technical side. They were elected, But it seemed to me, and that's what I want to talk about athlete leadership, is the difference between election, being brought to by your peers to that position, and then actually having your peers behind you try and affect change. So I decided I was going to try and run for this chair of the sport commission, because there's chair of the sport commission, athletes rep to the sport commission. Too much policy for me. But the goal there wasn't just to get elected. So I got elected, yay, pat myself on the back. Everyone in the international community said, yes, Jeff, we want you there. But why did they want me there? So the thing that I knew is that if I showed up in the room for the first meeting and stood up on my high horse and said, I'm an athlete, I know everything, first of all, they're going to tell me to sit down, listen, they've been there a long time, okay? And we can try and break down the doors, but one of the first things I learned was you got to sit there and, in my opinion, you actually had to be quiet for about 6 months. You had to gain the respect to be able to speak in the room. And I find too often we try and run in, break down the door, and say everything. Be there. People have been there for a long time, whether they're good or bad, whether they are influencing in a positive or bad, negative way, but they feel that they need to belong there. So you need to try and work into that. So that was the first thing that I think when it came to athlete leadership is we have a lot of things to say, but figure out how to work the system. Once you get to the top of it, you can try and restructure it. But don't try and really push all your efforts until you can figure out how to change that system. The second part, and this was I think the biggest part of it all, was I knew that if I went into that system and went into that, come up with ideas and propose new things, that unless there was like an actual backing behind me, it's probably going to go nowhere. So it's one thing to get elected, it's another thing to actually, instead of just saying what's in here, to say what everyone else thinks. So the first thing that I did when I did that is I organized an athletes rep meeting for all the international communities. So at a World Cup, we got 2 athletes from every single team, every single nation into the room, and I said, what's broken in our sport? What do we need to fix? Didn't promise that we could, because I mean, we're probably going to get there and say, oh, we need this, we need this, we need this, and the powers that be would say, oh, we've thought of that. But the key thing there was that we had support from the athletes. So we came up with 4 key priorities. We wanted more races, more prize money, like always. We wanted more representation at that, and we also, Sam, what was the 4th, remember? That's okay. The key thing behind there is that because I came to the meetings that happen once a year where policy is made, and the FIL, the Luge Federation, had seen these meetings happen all the time, the second I spoke, it wasn't just Jeff speaking, it was like the entire community speaking. They'd seen that this was coming. They saw that these were the issues that came out. And so we got to the point where there was a race that would just beginning. It was called the team relay. And there were some people who liked it and some people who didn't. The athletes all loved it. They wanted this race there. But the problem was, because of sponsorship rules, they wouldn't let it be a World Cup. So no athletes really cared about it if it wasn't a World Cup. So the voice came back and said, we will race this race, we love this race, but it has to be a World Cup. And it got pushed back and said, no, it can't be a World Cup because of this reason and this reason. And we said, well, no. We're not going to race it unless it's a World Cup. The good story about that is it wasn't just me saying it. They knew that it was the entire Luge community saying it. It was all the athletes saying it through the various levels of athletes reps. So there was a couple other successes that happened in there, but that was kind of the story on the athletes leadership side that I wanted to try and get out. That it's one thing to get elected. It's another thing to try and break the system right away. But there's multiple layers of support you can have behind you. Make that visible, and when you get into the position where you feel you can influence, wait, try and figure it out, and then work it in the best way you can.
I was told very strictly not to turn this on until it was my turn.
Turn mine off now.
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Dasha. It's nice to be at another forum, my 3rd. I'll start on a slightly sentimental note just because it's first night and I'm allowed, but I remember 2 years ago when I came to my first forum, they had a panel very similar to this on the first night, and I remember thinking, like, wow, those guys are like there's people who are like young and they're doing really exciting things, and I'm like, how do I get to sit up there and talk about something? I'm like, okay, I guess I actually got to do something that deserves that kind of merit. But anyway, I just remember feeling really inspired after, and even more after the weekend, and even more after last year. So it is really exciting, and I just hope that everyone walks away with that, and from the weekend, just to sort of echo what's been said already. For me specifically, I come from the sport of Taekwondo, so I was on the national team for 11 years. I retired about three years ago, mostly to focus on school a little bit more, so I'm in law school now. But the nice thing is that I had what I would call a very lucky, borderline easy transition, because I started getting involved with the policy side of my sport while I was still competing. And I know that's not easy for everyone, because a lot of people just prefer to focus on the sport, doing what they got to do. And for me, it was really evaluating what do I actually want to be doing. And at one point, I realized I was caring more about the team dynamic and what was going on at the policy level than actually what I was doing in the sport itself. And then I said, okay, I think that's a sign. I think that's a sign that I may be ready to move on to a different capacity. But it's, I got a chance to evaluate. So about Taekwondo, like maybe a little bit like Luge, it did also come from a very traditional background. It was a Korean martial art that had been brought over by these grandmasters, and they had a very specific, they were the masters of the sport truly, but they had a very specific way of doing things, and the way they ran Taekwondo business, very much behind closed doors. There's a lot of hierarchy and seniority involved, very unlike sort of a modern sports system where everything is a little bit more transparent, etc. So as Taekwondo became an Olympic sport in 2000 officially, there was more pressure on the sport, with it getting more funding and everything, to bring its system up to those standards. At that time, we had one athlete rep position on our board of directors, and usually, we had some really great people in that role, but it was a small voice overall. It was a little bit of a trophy position to say, oh yeah, we've got an athlete on the board, but a lot of the time that athlete didn't have much say, or if they did, they got a nod and a smile, and that was as far as it went. So at the time that I came onto the board, which I think was around 2007, I started getting a little bit more involved, and then about 3 years ago, a group of athletes were talking, and we said, okay, you know what? We've reached a new level in our sport. We don't just have sort of the senior sparring national team. We have a para program that's incredible. One of my fellow para Taekwondo athletes is here. She's on the athlete council, actually. Lisa, 4-time world champion. Just want to give her a little heads up. It's her first forum. So we call it Pumse. It's a Korean word for patterns. We also have a very strong patterns team. And meanwhile, those athletes don't compete at the Olympics. There's still a huge group. There's world championships. Those athletes work very hard. So we had a lot of groups that were not being represented by one athlete on the board, no matter how hard that athlete worked, or no matter how right they were for the position. So we said we need to get a more representative body sitting down around the table and talking about what's going on within all these groups. How do we need to come together? What's not working? What is working? And so that it's a little bit more of a representative voice. So what we did was we said, okay, the board position's great, but we need a council, and we need that council to be an official member of Taekwondo Canada. So the same way as provinces are members, or usually it's, we need voting power. We need a voice at the table. So we applied under special community body status, which essentially gave groups a chance to be a voting member. So for example, like coaches or referees, people like that. So we gained voting status. We created bylaws for the organization, and we were actually very lucky because the NSO was very supportive of this process. So our lawyer, we asked him, can you give us like 2 or 3 pro bono hours to look over what the hack job that we've done with these bylaws, and just give us a little bit of advice. And they did, through the NSO's help, which was great. And I think the takeaway from that is, it seems like maybe these are complicated things, like bylaws. Some of us, I never wrote a set of bylaws until this, but if you ask for help, it may actually be there. And if you say to the NSO, we're trying to create a more well-rounded athlete voice, if they say no, that's something to complain about, and a very legitimate thing to complain about. So usually I find that they're they can be willing to help if you talk to the right people. So from there, it's been about 2 years, and basically the big wins from that have resulted in the fact that we have voting status at our AGMs. We have a more representative athlete voice. We have a little bit more unity, I find. I mean, we have a lot of ups and downs in Taekwondo, but it feels a little bit more like we have a bit more of a talking circle and a bit more avenue to have these conversations. And then just little things, you know, aside from, you know, having impact on the selection criteria and whatnot, on the really big things, I don't know, it's kind of similar to the hospitality suite. We used to have like this really great Taekwondo nationals after party. This thing was like for the record books. Like everyone would stay an extra day just so they could go to this thing, and then it kind of fizzled away over the years. And we're like, we have to, like, let's bring this back, 'cause it's such a fun part of getting together, and it's such a great part of nationals. So now we're kind of doing it where it's hosted by the athlete council. And, you know, and then from there comes like, oh, we can, you know, what sponsorship can we attract to this? And those are really big next steps. But anyway, it's great because people are getting more excited about the sport again, not necessarily through policy, but just through having fun together and talking. And anyway, yeah, so it's things like that. And it's not without its challenges. Like, we have a very complicated board, and sometimes we do encounter a lot of resistance. Like recently, we have a blog that's kind of dedicated to bashing Taekwondo Canada and everything it does. So recently I was told, you know, she's in law school, she should know this and that, maybe it's not too late for med school, so. But I said I was gonna use it as a joke at forum, so I do have a good sense of humor about it. But anyway, point is to say that you might encounter a bit of resistance from people who don't see the athlete voice as something important in the progression of sport, who want to keep it, like, you know, we talked about a little bit old school and a little bit more in the hands of the NSO or whoever it is that's making the big decisions, especially when there's funds involved. But the good news is that there are people who are really willing to jump on board, and the more collective power you have, the more traction you have. And I found it to be a really great tool, and every year I walk away from here, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do more with it, so yeah, I guess that's my small one.
All right. It sounds like, Dasha, you should be on that Jimmy Kimmel athletes reading mean tweets about themselves. So my name is Thea Culley, and I play field hockey for the women's national team. I've been on the team since 2006, and I am still currently pushing for Rio 2016. I've been the female athlete rep since 2009, and when I came into it, I didn't really know anything about what I was getting myself into. It was just at the pitch one day, our previous athlete rep had retired after 2008, and there wasn't really a lot going on, and it was kind of looking around the group saying, okay, who's got time to do this, who wants to do this? And at that point, I was moving into a more leadership role on the team, and so I said, well, sure, why not? So I'm really glad I did. I came to my first forum in 2010 and learned a ton. And I think probably the biggest challenge that we faced when I was first on the board was our head office was in Ottawa, and both the men's and the women's national teams centralized in Vancouver. So with the president and the executive director, CEO being in Ottawa, there was this major disconnect, and there was, you know, board members strewn across the province, and Canada faces geography as a barrier. And we didn't have that direct line of communication between what the national team was doing and what the head office thought we were doing. You know, for the first, well, actually to this day, the president of that time still calls me Tia. She still cannot get it to her head that it's Thea, because there wasn't that disconnect. So being able to be on that board, we're lucky. We have a men's rep and a women's rep that sit on the board. We have voting power. You know, we actually have quite a bit of say as far as sports go on the board. But having that consistent communication with our board really allowed us to establish a relationship and and trust. The more they get to know us and realize that we really want to be a part of what they're doing with policy and try to make sport better for everyone, the more they respect us. And I mean, the first thing that happened was after my first forum, I went back and I said, this is great, I loved it, I really want to go again. And the CEO at that time said, okay, great, we will fund, you know, Athlete Can pays for one rep, we will fund the second so that we can have both the men's and the women's rep attend every forum every year instead of alternating. So that was probably our first big win, is that we now have both reps being able to attend the forum every year. And then secondly, Field Hockey Canada is just undergoing the new bylaw writing and streamlining membership for the bylaws with the new Not-for-Profit Act. And the board has been really supportive of keeping both athlete reps on the board. And so we had our membership streams that were the PSOs and then the national team athletes. And unfortunately, we had a PSO who said that by having a national team athlete membership stream, we were conflicting with their values as a PSO by treating national team athletes differently from the rest of their membership. They said that they supported us being on the board, but it was the mechanism of how we got there. And that was really quite disappointing because, you know, the only way that we can control who the national team, like the rep is on the board, is to have the national team athletes vote for them, and in order to do that, we need to be a membership stream. And it went back and forth, and I think the biggest win for me in that was that I had full support of the board. The board wanted us to be there. They wanted us to have our own vote to get the reps to the board. They really supported us, and they did everything that they could to try and work with the PSO to say how important it was that this is how the mechanism has to be. And it wasn't, they tried to use funding from Sport Canada and et cetera to try and make it clear to the PSO, but it really wasn't the funding for them. It was more they wanted to have us as a voice on the board. So I think that's been a real plus, and I mean, we ended up having to compromise with the route that we've gone, but just having your board support because of being involved and staying consistent and letting them know that you're actually quite interested. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing your stories with us. Does anyone have any questions for any of our panelists up here in terms of their experiences? Or sure, come on up.
How did you actually get around the NFP Act to get on the board?
Right. So why?
One second.
Yep.
Can you stand up? Name and sport, please.
Tyler Mosher, Paris Snowboard Nordic, Athletes Council Chair, CPC. Thea Culley, how did you get around the NFP Act to get your appointed chair representative on the board?
So what we've had to do, I think actually we followed Rugby Canada's lead on this. What we've had to do is write in a little bit of a tricky policy that's not 100% in our favor, but it was the best compromise. And the way that it is that there's only one membership stream now. It is the PSOs, but it's written to policy that there must be a male and a female athlete rep on the board, and they must be either a current national team athlete or retired within 8 years. And then it will say that it must be, the candidates will be put forward by the National Team Council. So it's still in the process of working that out. In reality, it will basically come down to the same type of thing where the national team athletes will vote on their rep. We will put forth those two names to the AGM and the PSOs to vote. And in good faith, it will be acclamation. They can't actually put forward their own candidates. The problem that we now face is that we're taking it in good faith that they're always going to say yes. What they can do is say no. They can't put their own members forward, but they could veto and say, no, we don't want those two people as representatives. So that was the difficulty. It's not something we faced with our NSO, but a PSO who decided that the mechanism was unfair to their values. So we'll still be ironing out all of the details and how that actually looks and what can we get into bylaws. But at the end of the day, if it's not ingrained in your bylaws, they can overturn policy, and so that kind of mechanism isn't as sound as having two streams. So if you can urge your NSO to keep it so that you have a national team athlete stream and a PSO stream, I really encourage you to do that, because that's the only sound way for you to ensure that your athletes are voting on your rep. And I never thought I was going to know this much about bylaws either. Who knew?
Any other questions? No? Yes? Yeah.
Sure, I got one. Ryan from Freestyle Skiing. How much did you borrow from, say, the athlete leadership handbook, or maybe Jeff talking to other international athletes and following best practices or documents forward from whatever country, or maybe Thea, sort of working with some of the more senior board members for mentorship? Where did you sort of lean on to get to the next level or fill the gaps in knowledge?
Name sport? Oh, we did it. Sorry.
Did I, what?
You did do it.
I didn't do it.
Yeah, I said my name in sport. Ryan Freestyle.
I didn't hear it.
Okay. So one interesting, I wish I'd known and been involved with Athletes Can early on. I didn't. Sorry, this thing's, I'm gonna hold my hand here. I didn't refer to anything in how to navigate it. Personally, I hate policy. I can't stand it. It hurts my head. But I found people within the organization who understood it and were able to put it into my terms, so that I told them what my goal was, how the backing I had, and they helped me navigate the right way. So that's what I meant by find out how to work the system, how the system works, and then find out how to bring your ideas through the system in that way. So for me, that was the best way. It wasn't something I excelled at. It still isn't something I excel at when it comes to the policy side. But you find the people who know it, and then you get them to work with you.
For me, it was actually the PSO that was protesting that brought forward the rugby template that we ended up basing ours off of. The issue came to me quite late. We were in a time crunch to have everything go out in time for our AGM and the time. There was a lot of unfortunate events that led up to that, with me missing previous board calls because I was away at competition. So when I found out that they were, I think the PSO even came late with this, of saying actually we're abstaining. Their executive director was on the council that had been, the committee that had been asked to look over the bylaws and say whether they agreed with them. So it was something that kind of all of a sudden was put on the table with a very short time frame as far as getting it out so that we could have an AGM. So it was a very, very tight window and time crunch. So the rugby is the best thing that we came up with in a short period of time. And I contacted Jasmine asking, like, what is out there? And we are kind of in the same spot as the other NSOs right now of trying to figure it out. So there isn't one clear path that we could lean on quite heavily, because all the sports are kind of in the same spot where they're all searching for what's going to be the best practice. So with this new bylaws, I'm not sure that there was a whole lot of material out there of knowing what was going to be the best case scenario.
I can add to that as well. One thing I was going to say was that when we were creating our bylaws, we knew that likely, because we knew that the Nonprofit Act would change things for us, just like for our NSO. We kind of figured that we would have to go through some updates, and we tried to make them as solid as they were going to be at that point for the next couple of years, but we very much figured that the first time we have an Athlete Council AGM, we're going to hear a lot of opinion, and this thing is going to really take shape over the next couple of years when we get people's feedback and see what's going on. And so from that perspective, I mean, if you have a supportive athlete council and a supportive membership, you can always, you know, see how things fit and make those changes. Obviously, bylaws are meant to be quite sustainable, so I'm not advocating for sort of creating them on a whim, but I just mean that I think you definitely feel things out as you go, and we knew we'd have to transition just like our NSO did, and we tried to anticipate it a little bit in our bylaws, but again, from a very inexperienced standpoint, so.
In the interest of time, that favorite phrase, if you have any more questions, don't be shy. Ask this panel and ask anyone here. Literally everyone's going to have some story that will help in a little way, or a big way. So don't be shy and ask around. We have little gifts for $1 million checks.
I always wanted to know what's in those bags.
Don't open them on the stage. No one else can know what's in them. They're personalized.